one of my first short stories. It was 1942 when I met her again, the love of my life. Should I tell her how I felt? Or would it just be safer to say nothing at all? Her pretty blue eyes and kind smile, her long blonde hair that reached the middle of her back. Her name was Caron Trewby, her star sign was Aries, and as I saw her coming off the train that fateful day, I swear my heart stopped for some seconds. The day was the 24th of March, and spring was in the air. The flowers were beginning to bloom, and the leaves on the trees were now a pleasant green color. The sun shone brightly, but there was still a chill in the air. I observed her stepping off the train and remembered thinking, my God, it's Caron. The Caron I hadn't seen for 10 or so years. The Caron that had gone off with my best mate, and left me high and dry. I approached her nervously, and she looked up with a friendly smile. It's George, I said. She replied in a friendly way, George, oh my God. The steam from the train swept across the platform, and the engine roared as another journey to another station was in progress. Amongst the chaos and the many people, she still looked radiant. But at the moment there was a war that was slowly destroying this country. The bombs would come down and leave the cities in tatters. On most days, soldiers would be seen, waiting for the train to take them to their destinations. For most, to an early grave. It was heartbreaking and true. I'm fine, I said, looking deep into her eyes. What have you been doing with yourself? I asked. She shrugged her sweet shoulders before she answered, not much, you know how it is. Years pass you by. I found this a strange comment and laughed it off. So what brings you back? Because of the war, the city hospitals need all the nurses they can get. So, that's why I'm back, she replied. That's right. The last time I saw you, you were training to be a nurse. I didn't mean to forget, I said, embarrassed. A thin smile appeared on her face. That's okay, I don't expect you to remember. I still felt bad, like I'd let her down, and said. Still, I should have remembered. Because at the time it was very important to you. She then replied, I must hurry, but let's meet up next Thursday night at the public house where we used to hang out. That sounds great. What time would you like me to be there? I asked enthusiastically. She gave it some thought before she answered, dead on 8. Is that okay with you? Perfect, I concluded. I watched her as she walked to the entrance of the station. She was like a breath of fresh air. A couple of young soldiers gave her wolf whistles, and she glanced in their direction and gave them smiles. Both lapped it up. I was meeting the brilliant Caron Trewby in the next couple of days, and I couldn't wait. Thursday had finally arrived. All day at work, all I could think of was her. I was so excited, and at the same time scared. What would this night bring? Would I finally bed the girl of my dreams? Even though I had a lot of respect for her, the thought of kissing her, and cuddling her warm body did arouse me somewhat. I did promise myself to act the perfect gentleman, and not to do anything uncouth. At 8 o'clock I walked into the public house. This was the first time I had entered these premises for years. The last time was with my best mate and Caron, before I found out they were involved. I hadn't seen my mate in years. All I know from what someone else had told me was, he was a doctor working abroad. I looked around to see if I could locate her. She was nowhere to be seen. This was odd, as it was her idea to meet here. I strolled to the bar and ordered a drink. I then decided to sit down at one of the corner tables, away from prying eyes. Also, where I sat, I could see the entrance to the place. So if she did walk in, I would know about it. I waited and waited. After about 20 minutes, I became irritable. Why wasn't she here? Had something happened to her? I began to worry. All of a sudden, she appeared, and she strolled in. She looked over in my direction, and she seemed pleased. Hello, mate, a voice said from behind me. I turned. It was David, my best mate from years ago. The one that had stolen Caron off me. The person I hoped I would never see again. I answered unconfidently, "Hello, David. Nice to see you." Caron made her way to the bar, and David sat beside me with a grin on his face. I couldn't believe it, George. After all these years, bumping into her again at work. Hopefully, my luck's in. Look at her bum through that dress. She's absolutely gorgeous. Wouldn't you say, mate? I wanted to be sick. All the happiness of meeting her again was quickly fading away. I looked at him with saddened eyes. "Just leave her be," I said angrily. "You're still a jealous idiot, aren't you, George? Can't you just be happy for us?" David said bluntly. I knew what he was like. He would only use her for one thing. I cared too much for her for this to happen. "Leave her be, or you'll have me to put up with." "Go to hell, dearest George," he answered aggressively. I looked up and Caron approached the table with 2 drinks. I pulled up a chair before David could, and she sat down. David gave me a cold stare, before saying in his charming way, "You look so lovely tonight, Caron." She replied back, "That's so kind. You are a true gentleman." "I second that," I said, hoping I had said it first. It was too late now. David gave me a wink before he said, "It's a funny story really, how me and Caron met at work. It would make you laugh, George." I watched with sheer horror as David moved his hand onto hers, and then saying in a lecherous sort of way, "You have such soft hands. Too soft and petite for a hard-working nurse." Then he gave me a look. I was really beginning to feel uncomfortable now. Of all the things that could have gone wrong tonight. He was playing her like a fiddle, and she was so unaware. For the rest of the night, I stayed focused and tried to be as easygoing as I could. If I put one foot out of place, then she would be gone like a flash. David done his best to wind me up, but once I got used to his game, it didn't affect me so much. About 10 o'clock I said my goodnights and left the pub. While I strolled home, I felt a little empty. I couldn't stop thinking about her and him. Out of everyone she could have ended up with, it was so disappointing it hurt. Suddenly the air raid siren blared out, and the people in front had panic looks on their faces. I knew where the nearest shelter was, so I proceeded to it quickly. Before entering the shelter, the last thing I saw was the planes high up above, heading towards this great city with their bombs. It was terrifying. The next morning, I looked about me at the devastation. The library just a few meters away was now just rubble. It made me cry. Then I saw the bodies of 3 people, and the police were aware of this. They quickly covered the corpses with blankets. One of the policemen said, "Move along, lad. You don't want to see this." I nodded to him and carried on with my journey home. If I still had a home, that is. Then my thoughts turned to Caron. Was she safe? Please God, please let her be safe. In the next coming days, I received some very bad news. The sort of news that could send a man insane, and yes, it was to do with Caron after all. On the night of the bombings, some terraced houses on the east side of the city had been destroyed. Through extra investigation, I found out that one of the houses had been recently purchased by a woman going by the name of Caron Trewby. In her bed that night there was a second body found, and trying to find out who it was, came to nothing. In the newspaper a couple of days later, there was a story about a top doctor who had been killed in the bombings, going by the name of David Brown. My so-called best mate. I then realized she was gone, and the sadness in my heart was overwhelming. I cried for many hours until I couldn't cry no more. A month later, as I was shopping for groceries, I saw a woman across the aisle. She was attractive. I didn't think nothing else of it. Then the oddest thing happened. Everywhere I went, she was there. And then one day I decided to approach her and ask her out. Miraculously, she said yes. 4 years have passed, and I am married to the most wonderful woman that a man could wish for, and we have 3 beautiful children. Occasionally I think back to Caron, and sadness is still felt. But as David always said, dear George is definitely laughing now. The end.